We're just really excited to have everyone here. So thanks everyone for logging in tonight and joining us. So we actually, right now, everyone's microphones are muted and your videos are also turned off. So we can't see or hear you, but you can use the chat feature to ask questions and interact with all of us. So if your webinar, if you can't see anyone else in the room, or if you can't see your video on, don't worry, it's okay, that's on our end. We have that disabled for this webinar. All right, welcome everyone. So we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the HAEA Youth Edition Webinar. This is our last webinar of 2018. We're really excited to have everyone here. The topic of this webinar is how to tell people about HAE. You know, in my experience working with patients and family members, a lot of times I hear that people oftentimes don't know what to say when they're confronted with a situation where they need to tell someone in their life about HAE. Whether that someone is a friend, a family member, whether that someone is a stranger, someone who you meet, whether that someone is a school nurse, a teacher, a coach, or maybe you're looking to share your story on more of a public forum with community members or influencers. And so really understanding what your message is and feeling confident in your ability to share your experiences and your condition is really important moving forward. So the goal of this webinar is really to provide you with some firsthand experiences from other HAE patients, so you can hear from them about some of the tips and tricks and stories that they have, and that's made them feel confident in sharing their stories. We can go to the next slide. So self-advocacy. You know, one of the important things to understand as you get older is that you really need to begin to speaking for yourself and advocating for yourself. And the first step in learning to advocate for yourself is gaining confidence in your ability to share your story. Without that confidence and without that ability, your reach really is limited. So self-advocacy is really a theme that we've been highlighting this year and that you guys will see moving forward. We can move to the next slide. So these are my tips. The one thing, if I could give tips to someone who's looking to share their story, my first tips would be 3 main tips. Know before you go, but what are you gonna know? You wanna know who you're speaking to. Who is your audience? Your story may be a little bit different when you tell your friend compared to your teacher. Your story may be a little different if you're telling someone, a stranger, compared to a family member. And so you really want to know who you're speaking to and who your audience is. You also want to know the facts because you don't want to give inaccurate information. Make sure that you understand what HAE is. And so when you're sharing that information with someone, you're confident in sharing that, you know, those details with them. Knowing the facts is really, really, really important. So educate yourself on HAE. Make sure you understand that HAE is a deficiency, a protein deficiency. Understand what your symptoms are, and understand how it impacts your life. Those are all facts that you may want to share with someone. Know your story. What should others know about HAE and about me? This is a big one. And this is really up to the individual and up to you to decide what you think other people should know about HAE and what part of your story you want to share with them. And remember, your story may change depending on who you're talking to. I mean, the facts will essentially be the same, but the way that you approach the story may need to be adjusted depending on who you talk to. You know, I know that sometimes it can be a little overwhelming when you're sharing your story. We have all gone through a lot, and I'm a patient myself, and sometimes when I have to share my story, I get a little lost. I have 15 years, because I'm a little older, I have 15 years of experiences that sometimes I don't know which part of that to share. And so, you know, over time and through practice, sharing your story becomes easier, and it really becomes mechanical. You know exactly what you're going to say because you've said it a lot of times, and you know how your story is going to change depending on who you talk to. So next slide. And really, people won't know about HAE unless you open up and tell them. You know, your story matters more than you realize, and people in your life will understand and they'll want to know more. But you do have to be that first one to open up and tell them. And sometimes that first step can be intimidating if you've never told people before, but it's really nothing to be worried about. I believe that you will find that people are much more open and welcoming to learn about your condition than you think that they will be. And so moving on, we can go to the next slide. We have some very special guest speakers today who are going to share their stories. I believe that it's really important for you guys to hear from your peers and hear their stories, their strategies, because who better to tell you how to do things than people who've gone through it. So we have our first speaker today is going to be Jack. Jack is 12 years old. I believe he's 12 years old. I think he's 12 years old, 12 or 13. And 13, I'm sorry, Jack. And he's gonna share his story about how he has told other people and used little stories in his life to inform people about HAE. So welcome, Jack.
Thank you. So there have been a lot of times where I had to explain HAE to someone who has never really heard of it before, like coaches and teachers, or sometimes even nurses and doctors that never really heard about it before. So a little bit about me. I started advocating for HAE at the age of 10. My first time talking publicly about HAE was at a youth summit in Denver, Colorado, in front of 500 people, which was a big difference from going to not talking publicly about HAE to going to 500 people. So I was very nervous, but I find it a lot easier to speak in front of people that you don't know or have never seen before. So I've been to Capitol Hill twice to speak to congressmen about HAE. The first time at Capitol Hill, I was nervous talking to like such a higher like place than me. The second time, I wasn't nervous at all because you can't really forget about HAE. Like you have it, so you can't really forget what to say. So when I tell someone about HAE, so first I tell them that I have a rare blood disorder called hereditary angioedema that causes random swellings in the body. Sometimes I show them pictures to help them better understand what it's like. I tell them how it affects me, like I miss a lot of school, sports, parties, and I tell them that as I get older, my attacks become more frequent. I tell them stories about my attacks. Like one time I had to be pulled out of a basketball game because I felt an attack coming on. Or one time when I tried to play with a PICC line in my arm. It wasn't the smartest idea. And then I tell them how I used to do my medications. Like, so when I was younger, I would bring the IV medication to the hospital to treat attacks only. And as I got older, I started doing the medicine at home because my mom learned how to do it to treat attacks because they became more frequent. And now I do the medicine twice a week by myself to prevent attacks. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
I think it's really interesting. You know, one of the things that you really emphasize in what you're talking about is that you've used stories when you tell other people about HAE. And sometimes when we share the stories and explain how these stories can help other people visualize how this disease impacts us. So I really commend you for that. Does anyone have any questions? I'd really encourage anyone right now to use the chat feature. If you guys have questions for Jack or comments for Jack, please feel free to use the chat feature and ask questions throughout the webinar. But Jack, thank you. That was a really awesome explanation, and I hope that everyone else found it useful. Does anyone have any questions for Jack? Please feel free to ask away. And I'll offer an opportunity for questions at the very end as well. So thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Our next panelist is Regina. Regina is a college student and one of the HAEA Pam King Scholarship recipients. Regina's going to talk a little bit about how she has used various platforms to inform people about HAE. Regina, welcome.
Hi, everyone. As she said, my name is Regina. I go by Ray. And a little bit about myself. I am a college student. I go to SUNY Fredonia in upstate New York. And I'm a theater major and a public relations major. So being that I am a PR major, I have learned to use public relations and more specifically social media as a platform to speak about hereditary angioedema. And a few of just the key points that I was going to talk about today is, as Lisa brought up earlier, know your target audience, like who you're trying to speak to, using visuals and making it personal. So when it comes to target audience, knowing who you speak to is not just about like the audience themselves. So as Lisa brought up earlier, you might be speaking to your family, or you might be speaking to a professor or a teacher, but also knowing if you're going like the more social route or the more public route on social media, knowing who uses what. So if your target audience is, say, someone who's in middle school or in high school, you need to know which platforms to use. So people who are ages 12 through 18 are more likely to use things like Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, or Snapchat. Whereas college students, in order, will use mostly Facebook, and then Instagram, then Twitter, and Snapchat as well. So you need to know like which platform you want to use. I use mostly Facebook because that's where I have most of the connections that I have. And that is where I think that I'm able to reach a more broad audience, or broader audience, excuse me. Secondly, use visuals. An example, like when you're scrolling through social media, you're scrolling through Facebook, and you see like a really long paragraph, and then you see an ellipses or like a ... at the end, or it says continue reading. But then as you're scrolling, you see a poster right underneath it. Your eye is more likely to be drawn to the poster or the visual. So in order to get people to really notice what you're posting or notice what you're trying to say, use visuals. Use posters, use images, and then have a description or talk about the image, because that'll help really bring people in and reel them in to get their attention. Even using personal pictures, like in person when I'm describing what HAE does to me, I have pictures of when my face would swell, or I have a picture of both of my hands that my mom would take, where I'm comparing a regular hand, like my hand when it's a normal size, to my hand when it's swollen. And people are like, oh, that's what you mean when you say that your hand swells, and like having that visual help them understand it a little bit better. And even making videos. So my freshman year of high school, and no, not in high school, excuse me, in college, I made a Facebook Live video, and I was taking my medication because I knew a lot of people who had asked me, how do you take your medication? What is it for? So I went on Facebook and I did Facebook Live, and I took my medication while explaining what HAE is, how it affects me. I brought up like times when I had to miss class and I had to tell my friends, Can you let the professor know? I'll email them as well, but let them know I won't be able to attend class because my feet are swollen, I can't walk. And I'll bring those times up, and then I'll explain what's happening to me at that time. And that really helps people understand it, like putting it into context and making it personal, because then people are able to connect to you, like not just as a patient, but as a person. That was make it personal. And then just like 2 more easy things. In school, use your quote unquote free topics to talk about HAE. So in my public relations class, we had to do an informative speech, and I spoke about HAE and how it affects me and how it affects other people, the different types of HAE, et cetera, et cetera. And in my creative writing class, I wrote about HAE as my personal story. And in that one, I was able to do less of a formal fact-based presentation or writing. I was able to talk about how it affected me, how like what kind of attacks I had, how it affected my family, how it affected school. And I really got to be like literally be creative with that. And that's what really was able to help people understand it on a more personal level. And I only thought about this a few days ago when I saw someone doing kind of a quote unquote webinar, like what we're doing right now. On Facebook Live, you can have people commenting on it. So if you feel nervous talking to a lot of people in person, you can go on Facebook Live and make a video, talk about HAE and how it affects you. And as people come on, let them know that they can ask questions. And as Lisa's having us do, have them say they can type in questions in the comments and answer questions as you go along, because it might just help you if you feel nervous talking to people in person, to do something on social media. So those are just the ways that I talk about HAE.
Awesome. I personally, I really invite everyone who's joining us today to ask questions. Oh, Maddie asked, what's your major?
Oh, I'm a double major in theater arts and public relations.
Cool. Everyone else, please feel free to ask questions for Ray, but I have a couple questions. So, you said that you did a presentation for your class.
Yeah.
So actually we have one question that's asking, how many presentations have you done about HAE?
I think so far I've done, if not a full presentation, I've definitely used papers at least once a semester, like in every class. If we've had like a free topic, I've been able to talk about it or incorporate it somehow.
What was the response? When you had to do an actual presentation, what was the response from people? And then what was the response from your professors?
Students were really surprised because people often think that when you have a deficiency or an illness that it's visible. And like when they look at you, you can be able to tell that something's wrong. I'm like, no, I go about my everyday life, I perform. And they were like, how, if like physical and emotional trauma, like they're like, how do you balance that with school? And the response was actually really welcoming, and supportive. Because like knowing your audience is one of the things I was speaking to them as a college student. So they were able to be like, so on top of all the stresses of college, how do you balance this? And my professors, they were surprised. They were like, I didn't know that when you called out of class, it was this serious. Now I understand what is happening. And some of them even asked me, and some people would stay after class and ask me even more questions. And that's actually how I got people to be interested in understanding what HAE is. I've even had some of my friends say that they went to the website that I sent them, the HAEA website, or like some of the medications websites, like the Farazier website, and they looked into it and they're like, oh, I saw some of those pictures. That's what you go through. So it was actually really supportive. So nothing to be scared of.
Yeah. And then when you said that you posted videos online, right?
Yeah.
What was, for people in your life who saw those videos, did they talk to you about it after they saw it? Or did you find that people asked questions after they saw it? Or what was the response to that as well?
I definitely got a number of questions in person because my close friends definitely know about it. A few of my close friends actually are trained to give me my medication because I'm always hanging out with them. But, excuse me. people who were not as close to me, they were like, I didn't know that you were sick. And I got a lot of questions like when I was in the cafeteria eating lunch, and they were like, I saw your video, like, what was that about? I didn't fully understand it. And I did get a number of questions, and people show concern. And I think that that's the most important thing to take away is like, when people show concern, that proves that there's no reason to be scared about it. But I definitely got a number of questions in person from people on campus.
That's awesome. And really, I feel like it makes you feel more supported, you know, and so that people understand. And not only are you spreading HAE awareness, but you're also like opening your support network, and so that more people understand and realize what's going on with you. We have one person who commented and said that she's was allowed to do slides in her 5th and 3rd grade class. And so now she's used it for 2 years now. And so also, let's see, we have one person who's asking, when people ask what you did to yourself. I'm not sure I understand that question. So maybe you want to clarify, Samantha. Let's see. So awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. I'll go ahead and after all the presentations, we'll go ahead and come back to some of the questions that were posted. So thank you so much for sharing, Ray. I hope that, you know, people found it really interesting to hear from you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Let's see. We'll come back to this question, Samantha. So our next presenter is Karissa. Karissa is also a college student, and Karissa is also a Pam King, an HAEA Pam King scholarship recipient. So welcome, Karissa.
Hi, everyone. As Lisa said, my name is Karissa. I am also in college. I'm in North Carolina at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, double majoring in biology and chemistry. Biology was a recent switch. I was in engineering, but I want to go to med school after this. And I thought, you know, biology really aligns with medical school. So for me, when it comes to talking to people about HAE, the first step for me is always realizing that I need to talk about it. With this disease, it can be really hard sometimes to want to go out there and put yourself out there and talk about it, because it is something that makes you more vulnerable to people, and it is something that can just be hard to talk about at times. So the first step is realizing, you know, for your own safety and for your benefit, it's good to talk about HAE, especially as you get higher up in education. It's good to talk to counselors about it, to go to disability services. I've been in college twice. This is my second time. And the first time, I didn't know college had a disability services. So I was just going to college with HAE and in the hospital every other week and had no support. And I ended up having to medically withdraw because my HAE was running rampant. But when I came back to college, I got hooked up with disability services from the start and was able to tell them about HAE and what it does to me, and able to get support for like all of my issues as they came. So then every time I missed class, it was excused, and they could get a note taker for me. They could explain to my professors when I couldn't, or step in when necessary. And it's been really helpful to just, first of all, talk about it and realize that you need to talk about it. And the second step is kind of knowing your audience, as we've already talked about. What you say definitely does depend on who you are talking to. So for what I'm going to talk about is mostly for teachers and professors, because that's where I found it the most important in my life. So when you're talking to these people, it's good to start with the name, in my opinion. Hereditary angioedema is a mouthful. And most of the time when you go up to someone and say, I have hereditary angioedema, the reaction is, what? They're kind of like, you have what? I've never heard of this. Or can you say that one more time? Or is that real? So yeah, the first thing is to start with the name, get their reaction, let them process, and then go over your symptoms. So I like to first explain that it is a rare genetic disorder. So it can be passed, you know, from mother to child, just like your hair color. So if your mom's blonde, you could be born blonde. HAE is the same way. It can be passed down through generations. For me, I was a first generation patient, so it kind of didn't work that way for me. So I do explain, you know, if I have children, it will be hereditable. But for me, it wasn't from my parents. But if it was from yours, that could be helpful information. Then I go on to explain like what my specific symptoms are, because I know that the symptoms sometimes vary from patient to patient. So I go up to the person and I say, here are my symptoms. I have swelling in my hands, swelling in my feet. My tongue swells the size of a softball outside of my mouth. And they'll be like, oh, really? And I'm like, yes, this happens. And if they ever don't believe me or have more questions, kind of like Ray, I just show them a picture. Because sometimes people just, when they've never heard of something, it's hard for them to believe it. So I always encourage them, you know, to ask questions, to look at pictures, to Google it. You know, the Hereditary Angioedema Association has a great website with all kinds of great information. And there's also pictures already on Google of other people. So Googling it, you know, helps people realize, yes, this is real. And then I like to go on to like the more life-threatening emergency symptoms. So I do explain, you know, if my tongue swells during class, I'll probably walk out. If I'm walking out, it's okay to ask me, you know, what's going on? Or if it's a time where I can't walk out, like, here's what you need to do. Here are the emergency steps. Here's a piece of paper telling you what to do that you can keep on file. I also carry one of those pieces of paper with me. So just so they're aware of what to do. So then I also like to just go into detail about what it's like living with HAE as a college student. It is hard sometimes because, you know, college is very stressful. It's very fun. It's very exciting. You learn a lot of new things, but it is a lot, especially with HAE. So I do explain, you know, I have to take time and rest sometimes. Sometimes I won't be in class. Here's what it's like, and here's why I'm calling out of class if I call out of class. So I also kind of like to explain it kind of like a superpower, though, as much of an enemy as HAE can be at times. It's also like a superpower in that usually if I use Superman, they understand it. I can say, you know, Superman is sometimes Clark Kent. You can't see that he has superpowers, but he still has them. So that's kind of like me with HAE. You can't always see that I have HAE, but I still have it. And yeah, that's really how I go about telling people about HAE and about my case in particular.
Awesome. Thank you, Karissa.
You're welcome.
Again, you guys, please feel free to ask questions. One of the things that both you and Ray brought up that really helped me to conceptualize HAE was that it's invisible. You know, that people in your life don't always know what's going on or what it is, but it's there. Just like you said, it's like this invisible superpower. And once you begin to understand that, you know, if you don't tell people, they won't know, you know, and so it's okay to talk about it. I loved what you said in the beginning, that it's okay to talk about it and it's good to talk about it and you need to talk about it. And once you start to, I think that you've probably realized, and you sound like a pro at talking about it, that once you start talking about it and you begin to feel more comfortable, it really just becomes that much easier to talk about it. We have one question from Lucy, and she's asking, what do people say after you explain what it is?
So generally, it depends on the person. I've had professors look me in the face and say, huh, or okay, and you know, that's it. But I've also had people say, wow, I want to know more. And they'll start to ask me questions. And there's also people who will just empathize or sympathize with your situation. Because I know it can be hard sometimes as someone who doesn't understand HAE to sympathize with someone who does. So when you're really open about your case and what's going on, it allows them to come in and feel for your situation. and it opens the door for them to see you as a person. Because I know sometimes professors just see you as a number. They're just like, we got to get this class, we got to get it over with. But it allows them to see you as a person and actually recognize, hey, this person is dealing with this, and this is something I should be aware of and even accommodate if necessary. Sometimes when I'm telling friends, they're like, no way, this makes a lot of sense now. And I'm like, yeah, but it can scare some people. I've had a friend cry before because she was like, this is insane. And I was like, well, this is my life. It is just normal. And I think sometimes you just have to go an extra step and explain, don't feel sorry for me, but educate yourself on what's going on here, and just be there for me when I need you.
Totally. One thing that is interesting is that after you have that initial conversation with people, it's pretty cool, because I don't know if you found, but then you can update people casually about what's going on in your life.
Absolutely.
After you have that initial conversation about what it is and what's going on, maybe you're trying a new medicine, or maybe you had an attack, or maybe you had a really difficult night, and you can bring it up and they'll understand. Have you found that to be true?
Absolutely. I know some professors I've actually, gotten really close to because I was just open about my HAE. And every time I email them saying, hey, I'm missing class because of my disability, they're like, please keep me updated, or let me know what's going on, or I'll pray for you. People care. I know sometimes we think people don't care, but they do when you're open about things.
Definitely. Awesome. I'm curious to know if anyone here has had questions or concerns or issues when you've approached someone to talk about HAE, and we haven't addressed that specific kind of person here in this chat. Is someone wondering about how to tell someone in their life about HAE, and we haven't covered that here? Maybe we can give you some tips. One of the listener, or one of our attendees, is saying that she tells her best friend who's also sick, and they can talk back and forth to each other. So, it really helps when you have that person to talk to and to give feedback from. So thank you, Karissa. It really is wonderful to have you share your story with us. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to Ray, and thank you to Jack. I didn't see a lot of questions that came in since we stopped. But, one person said that sometimes people see that they're swollen and ask, what did you do to yourself? And it's annoying, but if you had a conversation, or you're able to feel comfortable telling those people really what it is, then you kind of are able to prevent those things, prevent them from speculating in the future. So just a couple things to remember. Know your audience, know your facts, and know your story. And really, you guys, once you've shared your story more than once, and the more times that you do it, the better you become at sharing your story and informing people about HAE. And just remember, the first step to self-advocacy is informing other people and feeling confident sharing your story. So thank you all so much. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide. One last opportunity for questions here. Does anyone have any questions? And if you have a question in your mind and you don't ask it, someone else is probably thinking that very same question. So please, you guys, feel free to ask questions and interact with us. I'm just wondering if anyone here, and please feel free to use the chat panel, has any insecurities about talking to people about HAE, or maybe someone has a story that they'd like to share quickly about telling someone about HAE. I know that one of the participants here said that recently they were interviewed about HAE, and they were really nervous, but his mom said that he sounded really smart. So sometimes, even though you feel insecure or you feel nervous about talking about it, you are the best person to tell people about it. So even though you may be nervous, other people probably won't realize that. And you'll come off sounding really smart and really knowledgeable. And, you know, the same Luke was also in the newspaper to share his story. So, you know, there's a lot of different ways to share your story and to tell other people about HAE and educate people. And I think everyone's doing a really fabulous job, and you guys are all superstars. And I really commend everyone for being so brave. And thank you to our panelists. Next slide, please. Just a reminder that you guys can email me at lisa@haea.org. We're always here if you have questions or need support. I am the youth advocate, and I'm here for anyone if any of you guys have any needs or questions moving forward. We will be posting this webinar on YouTube, and we'll be sending the link out in the December newsletter, so keep an eye out for that. We did just have a little comment from someone who said that one of my best friends asked what HAE was when I was wearing a 5K shirt. So they went to one of the HAE In Motion 5K runs, and they told him about his story, and he asked about his sister and dad, and now he asks about his sister and dad once a week. So, you know, I think you'll find that once you start telling people more about your condition, people will begin to ask more and wonder how you're doing. So thank you all so much for joining us tonight. These webinars really are for you and designed specifically for our young patients. And we just want to make you guys feel comfortable and give you an opportunity to hear from others who are going through very similar experiences. So thank you all for attending. And with that, we will wrap up tonight's webinar. Thank you. Thank you all.